Alright, what's going on, guys? Throughout the very long and rich history of FromSoftware's games, one thing they've always endeavored to do was innovate. Every new entry into their catalog tried new things and took at least one aspect of their last entry and said, how can we evolve that? And they have been well aware of this, always leaving at least one breadcrumb in their last game that points toward what comes next. But perhaps no other game that they've done before has innovated quite like what we're seeing now with Elden Ring Nightreign, which makes this question so interesting. What does Elden Ring Nightreign mean for the next major entry into the Souls catalog? So today we're going to take a look at some of the biggest innovations that Nightreign presents and theorize how these might be adapted into a future Souls game. But as we get started today, if you want to stay up to date on all things Elden Ring Nightreign and FromSoftware, go ahead and hit that subscribe button, and now let's get into it. When it comes to the next major Miyazaki Souls game, he's already made it pretty clear that he's not going to deviate from his trademark. In several interviews now, Miyazaki has stated that he still wants to make dark fantasy, for lack of a better word, Souls-like games. Now, where the deviations come will be in the gameplay features. If we look back in time, we really start to see the pattern around the release of Bloodborne, and of course the infamous hint at it through Marvelous Chester and the DLC of Dark Souls 1. Now, when we look back at Chester, many people point to his appearance, but he defied many of the game's rules in the way he fought. Now, it's not one-to-one with what we eventually saw in Bloodborne, but you can see the idea being planted there. Now, much of Bloodborne did not make it into Dark Souls 3, but one big revolutionary thing that did was the posture system and visceral attacks on bosses. Sekiro was an experimental title in many ways, and we saw a lot of that game manifest in Elden Ring through the stealth and of course the jump, which transformed the game tremendously. And now it feels like Nightreign is back in that gap, where this is a very experimental title to test out many features that we might see in their next Souls installment. So let's look at one of the first major innovations. The one thing that sticks out to me the most about Nightreign that I think we could see really influence their next game is the overall speed. Now, Sekiro was a very fast game, and Nightreign feels very similar to the way your player character moved in that game. But when Elden Ring actually released, things were slowed down tremendously from Sekiro to be more in line with Dark Souls 3 speed. And I think this was ultimately the right choice for Elden Ring, to give it more of that classic feel, but there were a lot of people who missed the really quick pace of Bloodborne and Sekiro, and were hoping that would be a new staple going forward. Well, we saw this speed return in Armored Core 6, which also adapted many features from the Souls series not present in older Armored Core games, and with this, FromSoftware was able to show that they can still keep that same feeling of satisfying pattern recognition combat, while also making it more exciting, turned up to 11. Now, Nightreign is keeping with this pattern, and we've seen it time and time again in these experimental games. Whatever they're cooking up next, it is bound to be much faster, and I think this is part of the experiment that is succeeding. Now, another really revolutionary thing that Nightreign has done is with one of its characters, Recluse, and testing a new magic system. There's a really interesting dynamic going on here with Recluse, because you can still attack in the traditional way that magic worked in Elden Ring, but Recluse has an ability that absorbs magic damage used by anything in the vicinity, and stacking the certain elemental charge of that magic type can create a combination of 3 different elements, and depending on what that combination is, can unleash a unique spell. This creates a really satisfying loop that we haven't seen anything like in pretty much any of FromSoftware's games. Now, people have been begging for the magic system to be overhauled in FromSoftware games, and while they have updated the way abilities work in Elden Ring, magic is still relatively the same. So we can see here in Nightreign, they are very clearly testing the waters with a new magic system in Recluse. And I do think this is one natural step that we're going to see evolved in FromSoftware's next game. Now, do I think it's going to look identical to what we see with Recluse here? No, probably not. But when we actually look at magic in Elden Ring, it has yet to really set itself apart from just an advanced version of ranged combat. It still hasn't really reached that true magical feeling yet. Nobody's really asking for the melee combat to be overhauled, but there's so much room for growth with the magic systems that I think they could even lean into it so heavily that we get a magic-based Souls game in the future, where even the traditional melee combat is still some form of magic in itself. I wouldn't be too surprised by that. Now, some of y'all might think I'm crazy for this next one, but hear me out. Elden Ring and Sekiro, to a lesser extent, revolutionized combat in the Souls games by providing an extra dimension for the player to move with the jump. And Nightreign has taken this a little bit further. with the spectral hawk, allowing the player to take to the skies and travel across a great distance. Now, it's not true flight. It is a sort of glide, and the game does naturally steer you in one direction, as you don't have full control over where the hawk goes. But what if, and again, hear me out on this, I'll back it up here in a second, we see flight in a future Souls game. And I do think Guardian could be a little hint at this. Now, if you think I'm crazy and that would obviously never work, well, let's look at Armored Core 6. That's a game that really uses all areas of space for its combat. You're consistently flying around, having to worry about the enemy attacks, memorize their attack patterns, and the game knows that and it's built around that, and everything still works just fine. Now, of course, you're playing as a mech, and the flying feels very heavy. The next Souls game isn't going to be an Armored Core game. Yeah, we might get another Armored Core, but that's not what I'm talking about. The point I'm making here is that FromSoftware has demonstrated they can handle keeping their games the same style while incorporating that extra dimension of flight. And don't forget, Armored Core was made in the Elden Ring engine. It's using the same building blocks as Elden Ring. Now, of course, Guardian cannot truly fly, and its ability isn't true flight either. But even back in the base game and the DLC of Elden Ring, there are a lot of abilities that take you up into the air and keep you up there for a good period of time. I can really see this again, especially if they decide to lean more into the magic side of things in the future. To really build that fantasy, if they make the game around this idea, they could just take the rails off this kind of stuff. The framework's already there, and this is exactly the kind of thing I'm talking about with the way they innovate in their games. Now, there are some other obvious ones we could talk about, such as, obviously, Nightreign is an experiment for improving multiplayer in future games. They're trying new things with the buff system as well, and synergies between weapons. But the final one I really want to talk about and dive into, a way that Nightreign is really testing the waters for a future Souls game innovation, in my opinion, is randomization, particularly world events. Now, Nightreign is of course a roguelike. Randomization is the name of the game. What makes it fun is that it's different every time you play it. But one thing that I think was missing from the base game and the DLC of Elden Ring was that feeling of the world being alive. Now, everything in Elden Ring is scripted exactly as it's supposed to happen, and that's what makes the quality so good. However, once you get the game memorized, there's nothing left to surprise you. That's why streamers can no-hit the game and do crazy challenges like Elden Ring no-hit new game plus 1,000,000, because at that point it's all the same. But with the randomization in Nightreign, one of the coolest moments I think that caught everybody off guard was getting invaded by Margit mid-run. That's something that completely disrupts your run and flow you have going and triggers your fight or flight response. An event like that is just fundamentally missing in Elden Ring, after you already know what to expect. Now, yes, multiplayer invasions have been around for a long time, but because of the community outcry, it does seem like, unfortunately, FromSoftware's moving away from that, but replacing them with in-game events, I think, would be something that people would enjoy. A perfect example that we could put in the base game of Elden Ring would be the flying dragons like a Gil. Those would be great to be randomly flying around the world and could out of nowhere come and attack, triggering a field boss fight. Matter of fact, you could do that with all of the field bosses. Make their spawns random. After all, Randomizer is one of the most popular mods there is of Elden Ring. And I think with Nightreign testing the waters on how random players might like things, that could be something they lean into more in their next Souls game. And I could personally definitely see that happening. Does that mean do away with the scripted storytelling of the world? Absolutely not. But having randomized world events like that would go a long way to create a feeling of unease and a threat around every corner. But these are just some things I was looking at in Nightreign, and I think are ways FromSoftware are going to innovate in their next major Souls installment. But of course, what do you guys think we'll see in the next major Souls game? Do you think anything from Nightreign will make a return? Are they really experimenting with this game or not? Y'all let me know down below. Either way, if you enjoyed today's video, be sure to leave a like on it and subscribe if you're new around here. But with all that, I will catch you in the next one.